Going through Judges, and this is another additional progress as we've gone through the Bible verse by verse. We don't cherry pick. We go and we accept what it tells us. Judges, Hebrew, Shofetiym. This is about 300 years of the history of Israel, dealing with after they came into the promised land. And it's a picture of what's going to be their history from now on up until the present. It also is an example of what happens to nations in general, but this is dealing with the Hebrews and the Israelites in particular. And it's a circular pattern that's shown in both the Bible, and if you have studied world history, you'll see that it's true for all nations. Is a group of people, in this case the Israelites, usually it happens over a generation. Joshua and the elders are faithful to the Bible and follow what Yahweh says. But their children begin to fall away into sin, particularly sin that's introduced from the cultures surrounding them, in this case the Canaanites. Now from this sin, they wind up being oppressed and enslaved. And the slavery is so onerous that it causes them to repent. And Judges tell you how Yahweh would raise up judges to deliver them, which would occur. Then they'll have peace. And guess what? Within another generation,
fall back into sin.
they fall back into sin. Now, one of the things that Judges emphasize, and that's actually been emphasized starting in Genesis, is that it's very difficult to keep people pure who associate close association with people who are impure. In fact, it's impossible. It's like if you take a gallon of water and drop 1 little kilogram of arsenic in it, the water is ruined. You can't drink it. Even though the water started off pure, just a little poison, you just drop a little germ in there, and the water is ruined. And that happens all the time in nature.
Right.
And it's same is true for human cultures. Right now, we live in a culture that's contaminated by all kind of crazy stuff. Everybody knows that. And that's the culture in general. And then when you take the Hebrew culture, the black culture, specifically, and what's the difference between what happens to Gentiles and what happens to Hebrews in terms of suffering the consequences of their sin?
Ain't no difference. Is it a difference?
There's a slight difference. Most of the world is blind to this stuff, and but with us, we agree to it.
Yeah.
So what I think happens is that the consequences come on us faster and harder than it does to the population as whole. But in addition, though, one of the things we have that the rest of the population is there is a promise.
That if we turn back.
Right, and that the promise is there will be a remnant that will turn back. if you study world history, you find that there's some cultures that just didn't survive at all. They, you don't, you don't find any Syrians running around. You don't find any Assyrians running around back from these days. Their culture was totally destroyed. No, so keeping that in mind, as we go through Judges, we're going to see this pattern over and over again. And it's going to end, well, it starts two ways. Number one, even though they conquered the Canaanites, different tribes, they didn't drive them out. They're associated with them. So let's keep that in mind as we go through the verses. That even though they conquered them, most of the time they decided to try to enslave them and take tribute from them, but allowed them to remain in the land with them. Take a look at example at chapter 1, verses 8. Somebody want to read that?
Yeah. Now the children of Judah had fought against Jerusalem and had taken it and smitten it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. You said 1:8, right?
Right, 1:8. Okay, they conquered Jerusalem. How come about 300 years later David had to conquer it again? We talked about that last week.
Because of what you just talked about, they forsake Yah, and Yah gave them over, gave the power of the Canaanites over to overpower them again.
And how did they forsake Yah? Because what did he tell them to do? Did he just tell them to conquer and then turn around and enslave them?
Kill them all.
All what?
All the Canaanites?
Right, or drive them out.
Yeah.
Another way, let's flip that. What he says, I don't want you living here, these people.
Yeah.
I don't want you cohabitating with them.
Suburban flag.
But that's good. So why don't we do this? Why don't we go ahead? There was one little thing, it seems to jump track. And I wanted us to discuss this. Why is it here? What's it trying to tell us? Can someone read verses 113 through 115?
Judges 1:13 to 15?
Right, because we skipped over this.
Oh, okay.
But I don't think we should. Not that I have the answers, but I think we need to look at this.
Okay.
And trying to figure out what's going on.
And Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, took it, and he gave him Asha, the daughter, to his wife. And it came to pass, when she came to him, she moved him to ask his father a field. And she lighted from off her donkey, and Caleb said unto her, What wilt thou? And she said unto him, Give me a blessing, for thou hast given me a southland, and give me also springs of water. And Caleb gave her the upper springs and the nether springs. Is that what you want?
Right.
All right.
What does it mean? Why is it there? Seems to jump track subject-wise.
See, talking off the top of my head.
No, let's talk, because I'll be doing the same thing. Well, I wondered about this. I said, why is this here?
Doesn't it seem like at times how Yah blesses people in accordance to what their forefathers done, that the blessing seems to be like spread down? I mean,
That's true.
because Caleb, being that we have discussed that Caleb was not part of the tribes, the 12 tribes. He was an Edomite.
Right.
We discussed that, but he was a part of the
Nation.
Yeah, that decided that, hey, y'all, we're gonna follow y'all commandment, we can take that land. And y'all blessed Joshua and Caleb. And it seemed to be reciprocal through Caleb that those blessings were able to be able to go from his, go forth through his seed. That's a guess.
That's a good guess, but that's what's happening. But one of the things is what you have here is a woman receiving property rights. Now, through most of human history, in most cultures, including this one, when it started, did women have property rights?
No.
Right, a woman usually wasn't allowed to own land.
You gotta be the only child, right?
Hmm?
You gotta be the only child, right?
Actually, it goes back to Moses, and he established that had to be the only woman, the only female. But then you did get property rights. If a person died with no sons but a bunch of daughters, it was established in the law under Moses that they could inherit the land. Now, to use a phrase that's been used to death, in ancient cultures, this was revolutionary. And that women had no property rights in those days. Even in when America was established in England and European culture, a woman could not own property in her own name. It took 200 years of American evolution before women started getting the right to own property in their own land. But that was coming for the whole world. That's the way cultures were. It's still a part of the culture in the Middle East. Women cannot own property in their own name. Which I remember during the late 60s and 70s, during the Black Power movement and the hippie movement and all that kind of stuff, feminism claiming that Christianity has demonized or placed women in the second class citizen, and that in the Old Testament Bible made women second class citizens. These it's truly ironic that Yahweh anticipated when he wrote the Bible the lies that would be floated around 3,000 years later. And the key thing is, without this Bible that feminists criticize, they wouldn't have the rights they have right now. Women wouldn't be treated equally before the law, because it's the Bible that established that every person should be treated equally before the law. Now, true, they had to be the only surviving daughters. Here it doesn't mention that I don't know how to pronounce that. Asha was only surviving daughter. But it does point out that she received property in her own right 3,000 years ago, long before that became a general right of women in the Western world. Let's continue on. So I don't know if that's the reason it's put there, but that's an inference you can draw.
Well, what's kind of interesting too within this, then we're gonna within Judges, we're gonna come in to the story of the female judge too, right?
Right, Deborah.
So that's kind of interesting, right?
Right.
You just kind of stuck that in there, So maybe something with that. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. But that's sort of thing that I hope your study of parties will help us bring out.
Yeah.
is how do you dig into these meanings to develop what Yahweh is trying to tell us, both by plain language and by inference and by deduction, precept upon precept, taking every thought captive. Those portions of the Bible that sort of tells us that we got to approach this very seriously, and we've got to use all of our faculties to figure out what he's trying to tell us. Most of you know, I've been teaching this class for 10, 15 years. One thing I hate is bumper sticker theology. Can anybody give me a definition of bumper sticker theology?
Be patient with me. Yah isn't through with me yet.
Yeah, that's one. It's one of the things.
God is my co-pilot.
Oh, that's the one I hate the most of all. That totally flips. That totally flips the chain of command.
Yes, it does. I'll guide the ship. I'll guide the plane. Until it gets too difficult, then I'll let you take control.
Right. No. It's still bumper sticker theology, but the better ways is Yahweh is the pilot.
Yes,
I'm a passenger.
That's right.
But that's one of the, but you know, the whole thing is trying to, people coming up with their own theology and attributing it to Yahweh and then creating a cherry-picked phrase that oftentimes not even in the Bible. Not even a hint of that phrase is in the Bible. Because one of the things the Bible makes sure clear all the way through is that he's the one in charge. You're the most a passenger. Now you have some duties to perform, like keep your seat clean, don't rock the boat, treat your fellow passengers with dignity and respect, and don't mess with the pilot. Let the pilot fly the plane. But you are not in charge. Yahweh is in charge. And what we have to do is figure out what is our duty at this point. Joshua gave us a good example of that. And over again with each one of the 12 tribes. He was the commander-in-chief, and he would lead them in battle and make sure they survived. They did, though, have to battle.
Yeah.
They didn't kick back and let him some kind of way magically deliver the land to them.
The voice, like, and what you had said earlier today about that little drop getting into the water and tainting the whole thing, and you bring up a perfect example when we go back to Judges of Achan.
Right, Achan was a good example.
And you said, like, they don't rock the boat, but he definitely rocked
Rocked
the
the
boat.
boat.
And everybody started to suffer from it.
Right. And we also mentioned a little Joshua's failure too. After they defeated Jericho, he immediately went to AI, and he didn't consult them. It wasn't until they lost, how many, 36 men?
I don't know the exact number.
And was routed, then he consulted Yah. And he said, because there's sin in the camp. Now we had talked about this a long time ago, you would think it seems unfair to punish a whole group of people for the sin of one person. But if you take a look at the history of human cultures, that often happens. It's usually only one person is needed to mess up everything. My own personal experience, particularly in the 60s and 70s, dealing with trying to deal with black people on an organized fashion. Black power movement and all that stuff. Oftentimes, all of the thrust of the organization would be messed up by just one person. It only takes one person to disrupt the meeting. Now, the FBI knew this, so they developed a little thing called what?
Coattail, bro.
Where they send agents into meetings for just the purpose of disrupting. And I can tell you, I watched it, and they would be very effective.
Just flip one, huh?
They have people shooting each other before the end of the meeting.
Get your hands out my pocket. Nah.
So all of this stuff that we see, the problems that we see going on right now, have all been, in one way or another, foretold, predicted by this Bible. That's why we have to read it seriously. Now, one of the things that we see going through here oh, no, I'm sorry, let me, yeah, the constant phrase we see going through chapter 1 is they would conquer land, but they would not utterly drive them out. 130 is an example. Someone want to read that?
Neither did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kintron, nor the inhabitants of Nathal, but the Canaanites dwelt among them and became their tributaries.
What does that mean, tributaries?
Burden?
Hmm?
Get money from them.
Right. That often happened in ancient cultures. Well, it still happens today too. If a conquering country takes over another country, they basically tax them. In other words, they enslave that country. And that country is required to pay a certain amount of money to them or goods to them every, usually it's on a yearly basis. You're going to see this throughout human history, and you're going to see it referred to throughout the Bible and throughout Israelites' history. What's wrong with this? Can someone sort of outline that for us? What happens when one culture tries to live off of another culture like this?
Normally it'd be an uprising, right?
Eventually, yeah. How long do you think you're going to put up with this? Any culture, any group of people?
Not too long.
Usually about a generation.
The Hebrew people,
Uh-huh. What's that?
we deal with it all the time.
Right. Well, let's look at human history. Let's look at when Germany invaded France and they started looting the country after the armistice, and they had control of France. What happened? What did French people do?
Threw their hands up in the air and quit.
Huh?
Threw their hands up in the air and quit. Waited for the United States and Britain to come bail them out.
No. You ever heard of the Marquis, the French Resistance?
He has, he's been all silent.
Who's that? For 4 years, the French Resistance was killing Germans like crazy, blowing up trains, sabotaging, everything else. Made it a lot easier for D-Day when they were invaded. Now, the French leadership gave up. True, they did. They had the worst strategy in the world. They felt that they can rely on their own Maginot Line to keep the French Germans out. And they were totally incompetent. But the French people still fought like the devil, even after they were conquered. You can usually pick it up on documentaries, but no, the 4 years resistance movement, but the French were very good at killing Germans.
Could that be like maybe the birth of the guerrilla warfare, where a weaker person, they can't conquer the old?
We're going to be studying guerrilla warfare going through Judges. You're going to see elements of guerrilla warfare going through Judges right off the bat. So it wasn't the birth of the guerrilla warfare, but it's the same as guerrilla warfare.
Okay.
We talked about the Viet Cong. We talked about Afghanistan. Is that just because one country conquers another country, that don't end the fighting. The fighting just starts in a different way. Usually, remember we talked about asymmetric warfare, guerrilla warfare. That ain't new. That's been used throughout human history. And we're going to come across examples of that in Judges. Right off the bat, too. So even if you've got the unbelievers paying tribute, you still don't associate with them. Now this pattern, let's start on chapter 2, and let's start reading through it. Do everybody have a printout of chapter 2, or you want to read from the Bible? Your own Bible?
Judges 2.
Right, just go through 1 through 5.
And the angel of Yahuwah came up to Gilgal to Bochim and said, I made you to go out of Egypt and have brought you unto the land which I swear unto your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you. And ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have ye done this? Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall be as thorns in your sides, and their mighty ones shall be a snare unto you. And it came to pass when the angel of Yahuwah spake these words unto all the children of Israel, that the people lift up their voice and wept. And they called the name of that place Bochim, and they sacrificed there unto Yahuwah.
Wow, this is the angel of Yahweh. First, who's the angel of Yahweh?
Yeah, Hoshua.
Right. What's he doing showing up 1,200 years before he was born?
And then he not giving that sweet, sweet Jesus message either. I'll stop.
We went through a study on this, following Yeshua's appearance throughout history, starting in Genesis. One of the reasons why we
Bring it out.
fight against the concept of the Trinity. Now, one thing jumps off at me is verse 3. This is the angel of Yahweh speaking. Because they have disobeyed me, he says, I will not drive your enemies out before you, but they will be like thorns in your sides, and their gods will be a snare to you. Wow, that's pretty. In other words, he's saying, okay, I use you to drive these people out, but I'm going to stop doing that because you're not obeying me. Can anybody sort of relate that to present day life? I'm going to allow them to
Thorns.
be thorns in your side. What's going on in present day religious life? We're leaving Christendom and going into Hebrew. What has happened to Christianity? Why? Why is Christianity failing as a way of enabling people to lead righteous lives?
Because they're picking and choosing to make a doctrine of their own rather than following the doctrine of Yahweh.
Right. What's some of the phrases they use?
Expect a miracle.
That's true.
The law is done away with. We are
The law is
grace.
done away with.
That was the God of the Old Testament.
Right.
Yeah, Jesus has come.
Yeah. He's
What's
fulfilled
that?
the law.
Jesus has fulfilled the law.
Fulfill the law. We no longer have to obey it.
Just he had made a comment. I just don't want him to be silent. Say what you said in 3. I'm not gonna let you be silent, man. I'm not.
Well, it just says it here. It says, "I will never break my covenant."
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just obvious. Never.
Right. But we break the covenant.
Yes.
Right.
So like he said, those thorns will always be in our sides.
As long as we feel that we're not under the law, that we don't have to obey his commandments. Because that's what it's to at the end. Said, but you have not obeyed me. And that's not only we don't obey him in a reckless manner or a negligent manner, it's a part of the Christian doctrine that you don't have to obey him. I don't know how many times I've heard Christian teachers and ministers say we're no longer under the law.
That's
When
the first thing they say. You know, we teach this, that we teach the New Testament.
we teach the New Testament.
Chris said something Thursday, a new one that Creflo had said, not the one that to get rid of the 2 commandments, but I don't want to paraphrase what he, misquote what he said, but what he said is that Creflo said that the devil is trying to get you to abide by the law.
Right. I saw that.
You got it? The
He
devil-
actually said, and another
Oh,
one,
it's right there.
he actually said we don't have to obey the 10 Commandments. Go ahead. Go ahead and play
They
it.
lead you into sin. He said.
Huh?
He said that they lead you into sin, trying to keep them.
And then clapping for that. We could,
How many people are sitting in there? About 10,000?
Probably more than that. What did he say?
but we have a speed limit, idiot. What is he talking about, man?
But it's nonsense, but particularly it's nonsense when you put it up against the Torah, the Bible, but that's what's taught in Christianity every day.
But you know, when you read the letters that Paul wrote, he's admonishing the churches in the letters saying, don't fall back into slavery to the law, you know, it's okay to eat whatever. And so I know that's where they're getting that doctrine from.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're misreading it.
They
Because,
misinterpreted Paul,
misinterpreted.
as Peter warned them,
mm-hmm.
that will lead to their own destruction.
Right.
Because when a person said that they're using Paul's letters to say that it's all right to eat everything, then what they are literally doing is totally putting Shaul against Torah and the Hamashiach. Because the Hamashiach never said these things. We just read that he said, I'll never break my covenant
Right.
with you. We just read it. I will never. There's no leeway around never.
Mm-hmm.
So then to say Paul said it's all right to eat something is clearly your misunderstanding of what Paul is saying.
That's right, because most of the time what they do is what Paul was really trying to emphasize many times is that the law has been fulfilled. And how was the law fulfilled? Because Yeshua became the sacrificial lamb.
Yes.
And once he made that sacrifice, you no longer had to sacrifice lambs.
Exactly.
But that didn't mean you can now run out and
whatever you
chase
want.
your neighbor's wife and do whatever you want,
That's been
kill,
fulfilled.
murder, and steal.
I can have sex all I want with anybody.
Right.
That law been fulfilled.
But there's actually cults that have call themselves Christians that actually push that.
Mm.
Okay, now here's the turning point is 6 through 10. Joshua dies. Anybody want to read that?
And when Joshua had sent the people away, the Israelites went each to his own inheritance to take possession of the land. The people served Yahuwah all the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works of Yahuwah which he had done for Israel. And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of Yahuwah, died at the age of 110. And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnah Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gash. Also, all that generations were gathered to their father, and another generation rose after them, who did not know Yahuwah, not even the work which he had done for Israel.
All right, and another generation arose after them who did not know. This is the turning point when all of the people who were following Yahweh died, including Joshua and the elders. And then the next generation, that's why you notice that these appear to be generational. And I don't know if most of you remember when your teenage days were. As old as I am, I remember. But I remember that I had this feeling or this sense to me that I knew more than my parents.
Yes.
They were all buddy-duddies. They weren't hip. They weren't in on the latest songs, latest music, latest way of talking. In some kind of way, I felt that I would be respectful and listen to them, because back in those days, if you were disrespectful to a parent, you oftentimes got to knock the down. They didn't whoop you, they would come out and punch you. But at the same, so I kept my mouth shut, but I noticed most of my peer group felt the same way. I don't know if you folks went through that period, but I did. This is describing a pattern. This very pattern here is being described. That's why most of the Torah stresses over and over again in almost every book. You've got to teach your children. You're responsible for educating your children. The less you educate your children, the more apt they are to grow up with this attitude that they are not bound by the same rules you were, and they can create their own moral universe. Now, I don't know what efforts the Israelites had to teach their children. I know a couple of times I almost started a civil war when 3 tribes would try and set up monuments so that they'd be able to relate to their children why they were there. But I know it'd be more difficult if you allow your kids to run around with kids from the nearest Canaanite tribe. And with that in mind, let's get into 11. Wait a minute, I'm sorry folks, forgot something before we read. No, we'll go ahead and go
We got
through.
10 more minutes.
Okay. We got 11 through 23. Okay?
Okay, Israel served Baals. Then the Israelites did evil in the sight of Yahweh and worshipped and served the Baals. They abandoned Yahweh, the God of their fathers, who brought them out of the land of Egypt. They followed other gods from the gods of the peoples who were around them, and they bowed down to them and offended and provoked Yahweh to anger. So they abandoned Yahweh and served Baal and the Ashtaroth. So the anger of Yahweh burned against Israel, and they gave them into the hands of plunderers who robbed them. And he sold them into the hands of their surrounding enemies, so that they could no longer stand before their enemies. Wherever they went, the hand of Yahweh was against them for evil, as Yahweh had spoken, and as Yahweh had sworn to them, so that they were severely distressed. And Yahweh raised up judges who rescued them from the hands of those who robbed them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they played the prostitute after other gods, and they bowed down to them. They quickly turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, and obeying the commandments of Yahweh, they did not do as their fathers. When Yahweh raised up judges for them, he was with the judge, and he rescued them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For Yahweh was moved to pity by their groaning, because of those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, they turned back and behaved more corruptly than their fathers, and following and serving other gods, and bowing down to them. They did not abandon their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of Yahweh burned against Israel, and he said, because this nation has transgressed my covenant, which I have commanded their fathers, and has not listened to my voice, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua had left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether Israel will keep the way of Yahweh to walk in it as their fathers did, or not. So Yahweh allowed those nations to remain, not driving them out at once, and he did not give them into the hand of Joshua.
So he allowed those nations to remain. But at the same time, they themselves failed to drive them out.
So what?
They themselves, the different tribes, failed to drive them out. But here it says Yahweh allowed them to remain. Is that contradictory?
No.
Can somebody balance these?
Well, did it mean like, they didn't drive him out, so he allowed him to go there, so then he can use the enemies to chastise them for not obeying what he had told them to do?
Being a thorn in the side.
Huh?
Being a thorn in the side.
Right.
That's 2 and 3. Judges 2 and 3.
On the other hand, they're held responsible for not driving them out. But Yahweh takes responsibility of not allowing them to drive them out. 5 minutes?
I already said 5 minutes, bro.
Let's see if we can let these people go.